Hi, it's Foxx from eModels here, back with part 9 of our build of the Revell Colonial Viper Mark II. Today we're going to do some decals and other stuff. Hello, welcome back to part 9. I've done a few things off camera. I'll just show you. I have removed all the rubber masking fluid from the ship. So we've now got the dark grey paint chips on there. As you can see, the dark grey is the sea grey, the Humbrol sea grey that I painted on. That's now coming through nicely. And that looks a bit stark at the moment, but it will tone down once I start doing all the weathering. I've painted these sort of strips here where the canopy will go on top of. I think that's Tamiya RLM grey. For these, I didn't spray paint them. I just masked it off with some Tamiya tape and very carefully brush painted it. I have also painted inside the avionics bay, flat aluminium. And now we're ready to go. I explained something about the flat aluminium. You may notice that I haven't painted, if you can see this, inside the turbines here, the turbine intakes, they're not painted. And I haven't painted the rear engines. There's a very good reason for that. And after I check my focus, I'll tell you what I intend to do. And I'm going to stop saying that. I'm going to force myself to not keep saying what I'm going to do or what I intend to do. So every time I say that, slap me in your mind. I won't feel it, but it makes you feel better. The plan is, new phrase. The rear engines, the port and starboard lower engines, I want them to be the same shiny gloss as the main mid-engine that I've already painted. Flat aluminium with washes of flat black and some Tamiya smoke. Same for the turbine intakes, but they're going to be painted in Tamiya titanium silver, just a slightly different shade. The avionics bays, I don't necessarily want them to be shiny. They're going to be more of a grey colour. I'm going to use washes and oils to take that from a silver colour to a grey colour and just have hints of the silver coming out. So this has been matte varnished, waiting for decals. This has taken the shine off the silver, and when I've eventually finished this will also be matte as well. There will be more coats of matte varnish going on as we go along, and if I paint these now, the ones I want to be shiny, they'll lose that shine, and it ruins it. So I'm going to get the painting and varnishing and weathering done as much as I can. I'm then going to paint the flat aluminium parts and the titanium silver parts and do the washes and the smoke on top, and that will leave them nice and shiny. But for today, what I shall do, I made a decision. I was going to actually manually paint the stripes on, but I had to think about it, and when I made the Mobius kit, the decals were pretty terrible and they fell apart all the time, and I had a right nightmare, so I had to paint the stripes. A lot of the smaller decals also fell apart. But I've not tried the Revell ones yet, apart from the cockpit, and they seemed okay, so actually what I've decided to do is use the decals rather than paint the stripes. If the stripes don't work and they start falling apart, then I'll just have to paint them. But I'm going to give it a try. Not sure how much we'll get through today. A lot of the stages coming up now are going to be ones where I have to do 5 minutes of work and then wait for 24 hours for things to dry. So these videos, I know they're kind of far apart anyway, because it takes me forever to get around to doing them, but they're going to be spread out a little bit now, because it maybe I have to film a bit and then wait for a day. And then I need the daylight outside to film. So I've done decals with you before, but I'm going to show you one quick one. I'm not going to show you all the decals, because that's like hours of work. But you'll see the decal sheet is actually really nice. It's actually slightly better quality than, bearing in mind that this model, let me just check the focus, obsessed with focus. Bearing in mind this model was originally a Mobius model, and Revell got the rights to the tooling to sell it in Europe. They've actually come out with a superior decal sheet. The detail is crisper. You can read all the little tiny bits on here. They've added a decal for the stand and some signage for the stand as well, which wasn't in the Mobius strip. They just overall seem a bit better. They've got a similar thing to the Mobius strip where you either get the stripes with the insignia on, the Colonial insignia, or you get separate Colonial insignia in case you want to paint your own stripes. So you can stick this on top of the stripe. But yeah, the decals look really nice. So what we shall do is crack on with these. Let me just do the usual focus. Apologies for wobbly camera shenanigans. Every time I check the focus it wobbles. I'm just going to move these decals out of the way. Now the instructions call out are fairly clear. The one on the schnoz here on the nose is decal number 1. So now we've done decals before, but I'll run through it again in case you haven't seen that video. A few basic things you need for decals, or I need for decals, and you might want to do the same. I have my little pot of warm water, not hot, just warm. Actually it's slightly cool now. Piece of kitchen roll, the decal itself. I've got my fine trusty needle nose pliers, which are great for tiny things, and just sort of pliers. What an idiot. Tweezers. Pliers to a midget. Tweezers, and my normal bog standard tweezers just as a second setup pair. Cocktail stick. And then I have micro sol and micro set. Now I know I went through this before, but I'll go through it again for anybody who didn't watch through the video. Microsol and microset basically are designed to help decals soften, mould to the surface if it's an irregular surface, and then dry flat and dry with less shine. The way to use it, or the way I found is best to use it, if you read the instructions on the bottle it's completely confusing because they both have basically the same instructions, so you think, well, what's the difference in the product? The way I work it is I use a tiny drop, I'll just see if you can see this, into my water, which ideally is just lukewarm, not hot. Move him out of the way. Into my dipping water I'll just put a tiny drop of micro set, and I always forget which one is which here. Just a tiny drop. Kind of smells like feet, but you get used to it. Just mix that in a bit. Now that will help soften the decal while it's peeling, coming away from the backing paper. And I have my micro sol in its little bottle, using Ted's ever so funky method of stopping things falling over. I've put this where my glue normally goes, so I can't, because I've knocked these over so many times. It's only a small bottle, so if you knock this over, major pain. Now the trick is basically apply this first, then apply the decal, then apply more of that, and after a while, if it's not settling down properly, you can apply more to soften it even more. So, oh, I forgot, decal scissors. So let's crack on. I'm just going to do the one decal for now, and then when we've got the rest, I'm just going to check my focus again. Sorry about this, folks. I'm obsessed with making sure you don't watch a blur for 10 minutes. Got my decal. This has already been cut off the sheet, but I'm just going to trim it. When you're doing decals, the decals have a fine film around them, and when you take it off the sheet, you want to minimise the amount of space around the decal. There are various products you can use to reduce the sheen. When you put a decal on a model, you'll see it has that kind of silvery sheen to it around the edges, just apart from the decal. Almost like a halo. So what you want to do is cut as much of the backing paper away as you can without actually cutting into the decal. It's not always possible. If your decal is lots of little dots all separated out, then it's just not going to happen. Like on the side of a fine moulds X-Wing. I'm just going to carefully go around. You can use nail scissors or whatever you want for decals. I just got these Tamiya decal scissors because they're a bit sharper and they're a bit more comfortable than tiny little nail scissors. I hope you can see this. Bending. So we'll just trim that round, get it nice and flush to the edge. Just take your time. No, absolutely no reason to rush at all with decals. Now you may be wondering, as I was originally going to paint the stripes, I was going to paint them and include some sort of chipping in them. The traditional sci-fi method where you have, say, a red stripe and the red is chipped so you can see the white paint underneath. When you're painting it, you can use masking fluid like I did here. when you're doing decals, it's a bit hit and miss. What I'm going to be using is a pin or a cocktail stick to try and chip the decal. So let's just consult the leg end, have a look at the instructions. I mean, it's fairly straightforward, I don't really need to, but it basically goes straight up to the canopy and down to the nose. Now when I did mine and I painted my stripes, I actually stopped at this panel line and got it wrong, but I can live with it. Now I'm moving my other decals away because I don't want to get them wet for any reason. Okay, so let's get this dipped in. Where's my tweezers? There we are. Get these dipped in. So it should basically sit like that. And I could go to all the lengths of measuring it specifically, but I'm just going to judge it by eye because it's fairly straightforward. Okay, so what I'll do, I'll get this plonked into the water first. Oops, and upside down, hooray. Now you'll often find decals will curl up, so if you can, make sure they're as flat as you can get them, because it all needs to go under the water. Just give it a second. It might be a bit awkward. While that's setting, I'm going to take a bit of my microsol and just fairly carelessly and fairly liberally spread it on the area of the model where the decal is going to go. Now I have matte varnished this. Ideally with the decal, what you want to do is gloss varnish it so the decal has a nice flat surface to adhere to. You can do it straight onto the paint, but it's not going to grip as well. It will grip, but it's going to have lots of pockets and lumps and bumps to try and work around. I didn't have any gloss varnish, so I've used matte varnish. I've used it before in the past and it's never been a problem. But you'll often see people, as they're working on their model, using gloss coats and then finally adding the matte varnish afterwards. Right, now this is pretty quick because the decal is already coming off the paper. So I just want to get rid of the excess water, just put it on the tissue paper. Gently dab that. With little ones you have to be careful because you can dab it so the decal just disappears. This may be fairly quick actually. Now I'm not too fussed straight away about exactly where the decal goes because I can move it around. Okay, so let's just, if you can move it at first with your finger, that's fine. It's a less damaging way of doing it than using a big sharp pair of tweezers. Now it's gripping a little bit, so I'm going to put some more microsol on it. This is also a good way of removing decals using microsol and microset. So that should have some slip now. And just very gently move it into place. You can get quite physical with decals, just be careful. Don't get too physical, because they will rip. Especially if it's the Mobius kit, it's guaranteed to rip. They do rip really easily. Just lift this up a little bit if I can. I mean, I'm going to chip this anyway, so if I make a little tear, it's not the end of the world. Let's line that up. Come on. This is lining up now nicely. Get that in there. Try and get it, make sure it's straight. I hope you can see all this. Stripes can be either a dead easy thing to do or an absolute nightmare. Right, so that looks to me pretty much central, almost. Just pull it down a little bit. Now you can see it's wrinkled a bit, but I'm not too fussed because decals will wrinkle anyway, and that's what the microsol is for. So once I've got it in a place where I'm happy with it, and I'm happy it's lined up straight, I'll look down the nose. Yep, that's pretty spot on straight to me. So I'm just going to very gently now, because I don't want to move the decal. This little brush is a little one that came in a pack from Hobbycraft, and it's like about £2. Well, not really £2. They're just cheap throw-away brushes, but it's nice and soft and fairly flat, so it's great for all it gets used for is microsol. Now you will note here the decal goes over the panel line, which is a small groove. I want the decal to go in there, but I'm not going to do anything about it just yet. fairly generous coats of microsol on. I'm following the line of the decal because I don't want to ruck it up at the sides or make it go anywhere. Okay, so that's on. Now what I need to do now is just leave that to set properly. It will gradually dry. I'll probably give it about 20 minutes. Once it's dried, it should be nice and set in place, and what you can do then is you can add another bit of microsol over the top. It will probably settle into that panel line groove a little bit, but when it's dried off and cured, if I brush some more microsol over it, it should hunker down even more to the surface and start to settle into that groove. I can add 2 or 3 coats if I want over time, each time letting it dry for a bit. You can come back 24 hours later and do another coat of microsol. It will eventually settle into the groove, and if it doesn't go all the way, then I can gently persuade it with, say, a cocktail stick. I'll do that now and just see what happens. You can use a cocktail stick or a pair of tweezers, but I'm just going to almost no pressure, just gently push it into the groove. So I don't know if you'll be able to see there, it's gone in a little bit. I don't want to rip the decal. I don't want to rip it, so I'm only using almost no pressure. But that's gone into the groove a little bit, and as it dries out it will settle into there even more. You can get a good look at the lineup. And on successive applications of it, it will get drier. Now you will notice the decal has kind of gone all wrinkly here, and if you can see that, don't panic when that happens. It's just the decal stretching out a bit. I actually need to line that up again, don't I? It's gone a bit wonky. That's just the decal stretching and settling. It will flatten out, and again, you don't worry about that. That's looking pretty spanky. So don't worry if it goes wrinkly, that's normal. First time I ever did that, I was like, oh my god, I've ruined the decal, but when I came back about half an hour later, it settled down. And again, successive coats will help it grip. Microsol and microset are especially useful if you're putting a decal onto a really irregular surface. Something that's, say, ribbed. Like, okay, here's an example. I put the blue decal on the nose, just behind the nose cone of a Y-wing engine, and that's all ribbed like a, I can't really describe it, like a ribbed thing. If you say you were putting a decal on that, you want it to look like it's painted on, and that's what microset and microsol do. They make it adhere really closely, so once you've weathered it and everything else, it looks like you've painted it really well. So I'm going to leave that to dry for a little while. I'm going to go and crack on with all the rest of the decals, because I'm not going to sit here for like 6 hours and let you watch that. I'll crack on with the rest of these and get them done. Once they are done, and I've been getting to give them a couple of coats of microsol, we will come back and we will start with the weathering. I think. I'll probably change my plan. I always change my plan. I'm on the fly here. I don't plan these things properly. Oh no, we need to do chipping on the decals. So yeah, get them done. When we come back, I'll show you a quick and clever way to do little bits of paint chips on decals. Okay, back in a bit. And we're back. Okay, all the decals are now on. Decals I've got left over, handy tip for you. The decals I've got left over have gone into my decal bags. When you're making a model, you'll find you've usually got some decals left over. Don't throw them away, keep them. You never know when they might come in handy. And in fact, my little decal collection did come in handy. The decals went okay. They're far superior to the Mobius decals that I had on my Mobius Viper. Now that was a couple of years ago, so I don't know whether they've changed their decals now. They may have done, I hope they have. The Mobius decals are very brittle, fell apart. You couldn't move them around without them cracking and falling to pieces. These are a lot more stable. Not exactly perfect. There are some places where they didn't quite go together perfectly. All these stripes along here and the stripes underneath these bits, that's like 3 separate decals on this section here. 1, 2 and 3. There are slight gaps because they didn't fit perfectly no matter how much I moved them around. But it was absolutely much better to build, to put them on, because they weren't falling apart. One did go wrong, and that was down to me. This one at the back here just got completely screwed up and ended up having to throw it out. Luckily, I had still had some decals left from my Mobius Viper. Only slight problem is it's not exactly the same shade of red. I'll bring this closer so you can see. It's not exactly the same shade of red, so, and they're not quite as good quality as the Revell ones, so it's not brilliant. But I can, when I weather it, I should be able to mask that slightly anyway and hide it. There are some areas you can see, ow, that's my elbow, where it's not quite lined up. I've done some chipping here anyway to try and mask it a bit, but this white line here shouldn't be there really, but they shrank a little bit as they dried out and it kind of exposed itself. Fiddly bits. This decal around the front wasn't too bad, but it was a bit wrinkly, and the red on the front is two separate decals. There's 3 decals in that red bit there, 2 on the front edge and 1 here. But yeah, no, they're really good quality decals, much better than the Mobius one. Given the choice again, I think what I'd probably do is not use the decals. They were fiddly, they were kind of a pain to get on, especially around here where they didn't quite match. Because I'm chipped them, or because I am chipping them, I kind of disguised a lot of the mismatches. But I think for the next one I build, I'll just spray paint them, although spray painting that kind of corner can be a pain. Outside corners are fine, inside corners are a bit of a bugbear. One other thing that did happen is, and I'm kicking myself now, this decal here, the seam line down the front of the fuselage nose looked perfect when it was painted. Put the decal on, it fits to the surface, and now I can see, and you can probably see it if I can get close enough. I don't know if you will, but there's a big, you can now see the seam line slightly. It's highlighted it, and I didn't realise it was still visible when it was just masked and painted. Primed and painted, it was hidden. So a bit of a bummer, but hey, not the end of the world. Right, what I'm going to do now, I've saved the nose stripe to show you how I did this chipping. Now I will say this chipping isn't quite as satisfactory as paint chipping with liquid mask and when you're spraying paint on. If I was spray painting this, it'd probably look a lot better. But I'll show you what I did, and it's dead simple. Now I have left this overnight, so I don't know if this is going to work. All I did was put the decals on, a couple of coats of the micro sol, there you go, to bed them in. They've bedded quite nicely to some of the shapes and curves, so it looks more like they're painted on. They look a bit bright now, but when it's been weathered and everything else, they will not stand out quite so much. I'll do some white dry brushes and other washing and weathering to kind of tone them in so they'll blend in more. But to chip them, dead simple. You can use either a modelling knife, sharp one, your tweezers if you've got some needle nose tweezers, not pliers, or just a pin. Oh, that you can then drop on the floor and then not know where the heck it's just gone. There it is. It was either find it now or find it with my foot at some point. Right, so all I'm going to do is, like I've done here, just put some chips in. Now when I first did these, the decals were still quite floppy and loose, so the decals were coming up all over the place. This has been left overnight, so I don't know how this is going to work. But all I want to do is just suggest the paint coming off in the direction of travel if I can. So let's give it a try. I'll try and angle it so you can see it for once. And all I do is I'll push away from the decal, so that way, so I'm not rooking the decal up if I can. All I'm going to do is dead simply just chip at the decal. It's not going to take the paint off underneath. I did varnish before I put the decals on, so because this has had time to dry overnight, I'll try and do this so you can see it. This decal's a little more tenacious now, so it's going to not just rook up straight away. Now if you were painting, if you'd spray painted these stripes, you would just dot in some liquid mask with a cocktail stick for various different sizes of chips, but this is a bit more of a cobbled together solution. What I try and do is I try to do some on the stripe itself, but then some along the edge, just to suggest, just to break up that perfect straight line. Now the only downside with this is you can't get little tiny chips as easily, so it does look a bit more forced, and you do get a visible edge around where you've chipped up the decal. So when I've done this, I'll give it another coat of microsol, and then with subsequent coats of varnish it should hopefully bed down again and become less obvious. So I'm not going to do too much, just enough to suggest wear and tear. I'll try and do some scrapes as well, or maybe I won't. Sometimes decals will allow you to do little scrapes and scratches. Fine molds decals are quite good for that. These ones, however, want to come up in clumps, so I'm trying not to make everything the same size, because that would look a bit obvious. A bit of thumbnail action. Not quite what I'd expect if I was masking it, but again, I'm trying to do this so you can see what I'm doing. I'll do some along here. If you imagine it's flying this way, you'd expect there to be some chipping around this panel line edge. I might try with the knife actually, just to get this edge. Let's have a go. Just to highlight this little edge here. Perfect. And then I can add some extra chipping there. And I'm not putting a lot of pressure on here. I'm not really scraping much. I don't really want to particularly damage the paint underneath. The other problem with this, of course, is, or with the decals, is that I've done the paint chipping here, the grey paint chipping, and then the decals covered a lot of that up. So where I can, I'm trying to follow those chips, because the idea that the paint comes off but leaves the white paint chips off but leaves the red paint is a bit weird. Now I'm not actually being Canon here. I'm not. A lot of my models, I'll make them as much as I can look like the real thing, if you know what I mean. The filming miniature, or the thing in the film or TV program or whatever, if I'm doing a sci-fi model. With this one, I'm just kind of having fun with it. So yes, it's Apollo's Viper. No, I'm not making it look specifically like the CGI model or the studio set piece. I'm just kind of going wild with it and playing with it. That's it. I mean, it's looking at it now, it's kind of a bit uniform. The problem is, it's like trying to generate random numbers. If you try and write down random numbers, they won't really be random. You'll have patterns that you'll unconsciously put in. When you're trying to do paint chips, you can try and keep them as random as you want, but you won't. You'll unconsciously put little patterns in there. So just try and break them up as much as you can. Probably a bit more chip than I'd planned on, but just for fun. I think that'll do. Now, it does look a bit harsh. Like I say, you've got the white and the red and the white, and it's really kind of glaring, blaring. I'll tone that down with weathering. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put another quick go of microsol on there. Now, I don't know if you can see, there is still some sheen on the decals, some sort of glossy sheen around them. Not too worried about that, because subsequent coats of matte varnish will get rid of that. Right, so I'll go away and put, I'll go away and brush all this stuff off it first. I'll go away and put some more microsol on it, and then a coat of varnish. And when we come back, we'll do the first bit of weathering. Oh, I'm also going to paint these as well, the engine intakes. I've decided I'm not going to do a metallic colour, they're just going to be a grey with lots of weathering, so I'm going to paint these in as well, get it matte varnished, and we shall do the first bit of weathering. Back in a minute. And we're back. Okay, the Viper's now been matte varnished again, so all the decals are locked in now. So now we can actually start with the weathering. Now I've twiddled the camera angle a bit so you can see all this. I can't get everything in, unfortunately. Just double check you're in focus. Can't get everything in, but we shall do our best. I've matte varnished the decals. This is to protect the paint and the decals from the wash. You can actually do a wash directly on top of decals, and I did on a few of my models. But sometimes it makes the film around the decal a bit more obvious because the wash doesn't get always underneath it. So if I'm not sure about decals, fine molds decals, I'm happy to put a wash tray on top. They crumple up and they flatten out. These ones I'm not so sure, so I've varnished over them. What we're going to do, I'll do it really quickly because this is running on a bit. I'm going to make a smoke wash and then apply 1, maybe 2 coats of smoke wash. Like I explained in the other video, what you put on top of white paint changes the colour. Now I don't want this to be particularly dark. It's supposed to be a white chip. I want it to be grubby but not too grubby, so I'll do 1, maybe 2 washes. We'll see how the first one comes out. Now I've painted inside the engine intakes. That's now a sort of medium dark grey colour, and that'll be made even better with washes of smoke, and I'll probably put some black wash in there as well. You can't see it, but the paint on the turbine blades is a little bit ropey around the edge. It's not perfect, but that's not a problem because the washes will gather around the edges and blend that in. So some of the painting on the sides as well, it's not exactly perfect. There's some slightly ropey edges where it's a straight edge, and I've painted as close as I can. So it's like that, if you can see that. I don't know where the camera's pointing. So you might have a straight edge here, but the paint's kind of like that a bit. But again, the weathering's going to fade those in, so I'm not too fussed. If you know you're going to be doing heavy weathering, you can get away with some ropey painting. First thing I'm going to do, and I'll just make sure this is somewhere you can see. No, it's totally not anywhere you can see. Move this out of the way. Right, first thing we're going to do is make a smoke wash. I've got a bit of smoke wash left in this pot, but not much. Washes are very easy to make. You just need some thinner and the paint you're going to thin. This is Tamiya X19 Smoke. It's absolutely brilliant paint. So I'm just going to put a little bit in here. Just a drop, because it's already quite thick. And then we're just going to add some thinner. I've got loads of these little pots and lids, so I use these to make my washes. Put some thinner in. This is just Tamiya X20A thinner. And you can control how thin the wash is by the amount of paint you put in there and how much thinner you put into the paint. So that's a wash made. I'll just give it a quick stir if I can find my little stirry thing. My little stirry thing is a paintbrush where the brush fell off. Right, and that's a wash. Now we did washes before on the cockpit, so you know how this works. Basically the wash will just go into the nooks and crannies and darken them a little bit. Smoke, you could do this with a black wash, but it would look really obvious. Smoke is a nice colour, as I've explained before. It just subtly changes it and it gives you a warm tone. Now the reason I've got this thing standing up is if I did it flat, all the smoke would run down and gather underneath, and you get a big blob of smoke colour underneath, and I want to try and avoid that. It will gather around the bottom, but I'm not too fussed because the engines are back here, so I can weather that and make it look dirty and scruffy. So I'm just going to very quickly, and you don't need to be careful doing this, there's no great careful trick to it. I'm going to start at the top where you can't see, but I'll quickly move down. So I'm being quite generous, and I'm really just brushing it on without thinking about it. How much smoke wash you put on controls how much the colour changes. It's as simple as this. I might speed this film up in a second if it gets on a bit boring. If you put on too much, it'll just run down the ship. But again, that's absolutely fine. Like here, if I put on too much, it just runs down, but it gathers in all the little nooks and crannies. I'm not too fussed about it going in the avionics bay because that's going to have different weathering anyway. Just have to keep an eye on it when it does run down. You don't want a big blob appearing because that kind of spoils the look. So do keep an eye on it. Sometimes it's not, if it's too thick it will just run. Now when I'm doing these engine bits here, I'm really pouring it in quite thick. I'm getting a whole brush full in there, because as I say, I'll show you when I've done it later on, but I want it to gather around the edges between the blade and the housing and just provide that little soft blurred line of shading which helps cover up any uneven paint and also gives it a shadowy depth. It'll also gather around the blades as well. So we'll just go on. Now I've not painted the guns yet, so I'm not going to bother with those. The guns are going to be painted in metallic shades. So you can see it running. I hope you can see this. Let me just double check what you can see. Yeah, you can see that. It's just running down the wing. That's fine. You see how it's gathering down here? It will do that. It'll gather at the bottom of the wing, and that's fine. That's absolutely no problem at all. It'll gather in these little closed off bits. So if I did it horizontal, you'd just get this blobbing of colour underneath, which on some ships, if you're really going to heavily weather them, is fine. But on this one, I don't want it completely scruffy everywhere. I want to avoid that. So this is a trade-off. It's just the easiest way of doing it without getting colour building up underneath. It doesn't matter if it builds up at the bottom. Okay, right, now the first coat of smoke wash has had a chance to dry. It's a very subtle change, so I think I want a bit more. So basically what I'm going to do is do more smoke. I've used about half my wash so far, so I'm just going to make a little bit more smoke, and a little bit more thinner. What I've also done, if you can see here, I've started applying smoke wash to the rear end of the engine area as well. That's all painted white at the moment. Going to weather all this middle bit here. I don't know if you can see it. This middle bit here is white. The engines will be a silver colour, but I'm going to paint them once I've weathered everything else. I'm not doing them now, just because I, as with the other bits, I need the engines to be shiny, but I also need to matte varnish the bit in the middle. And if I paint the engines now and then matte varnish them, of course they won't be shiny. So I'm going to get everything weathered and matte varnished, then paint the engines. Right, so I'm just going to go ahead again and do another little blast of wash. This will be the second coat. Again, I'll probably just high speed this, because you've just seen this already. So I'll probably just kick the speed up so you don't have to watch it all. But it's exactly the same procedure. I just let it dry, see what the results are. This is why it's better to use a smoke wash rather than just slap on a load of smoke. If you use a wash of any colour, basically, if you want to change a tint slightly, if you want to slightly change the colour, a wash is a subtle change, as I've said. So if you do a wash, you can do one wash and see what happens. If it's not enough, do another wash. If it is enough, don't do another wash. It's as simple as that. Okay, this bit. Now smoke wash does take a while to dry when it's put on thick, so although the fuselage is dried and I can go for the second coat, the stuff in the little engine turbines here is still just a wash with wash, ironically. So I'm not putting any around there because they're still dripping in there. Still a flood of stuff in there, so I don't need to wait. I don't need to add any more to them just yet. If I need to, I can always go back later and do that. I might put some black wash in there as well at some point, just because in the engine, in the turbine, I want to be able to see the blades, the lines between the blades, and the black wash will bring those out. Plus it's supposed to be super dirty, so I can get away with the black wash there. Right, I'm going to hit the super speed button, and then we should be done then. So, avanti! Okay, so that's the second coat applied. Gonna leave this to dry now. I probably won't do another coat now. I don't think it needs another coat of smoke. That's probably enough. So I'm going to leave that to dry, let all the bits in the intakes dry properly. I'll do a second coat on the fuselage rear. But I think that is looking... You probably can't see it, like I say, but I think that's looking pretty shaded now. It just gives some subtle tone. Gathers around the panel line so the panels aren't just flat, they're nice and shaded. I might put it horizontal at some point and do some on the wings because they're looking a bit white. But I think that will do. So we'll leave it now for this week. When we come back, I'll probably make a start on the oil paints. I say probably because, like I said, my plans change every 5 minutes, so who can say. Thank you very much for watching as always. As ever, go along to emodels.co.uk. It's an absolutely brilliant online store. They've got everything you need from models to equipment, airbrushes, paints, glues, anything you need. As I always say, if they haven't got it, you don't need it. Also go along to eModels Facebook page, facebook.com/eModelsLTD. Fantastic community. Put your work up. Loads of other people on there. From professionals to amateurs who look like professionals and people just starting out. It's always good to go on there and give positive encouragement to someone who's just starting and just taking their first steps into the world of this crazy expensive and utterly silly obsession that we all love so much. So thank you very much for watching. Come back next time, hopefully the next week or so, and we'll crack on with some oil paints, arty-farty stuff. Until then folks, adios amoebas.